Okay, we just want to say welcome to everyone that has made the call. My name's Elizabeth Monarch. I am the 2021 chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the KYR organization. And we are just so thrilled and so excited that you all have chosen to participate in our Open Books, Open Mind Club today. I want to take 1 minute and let you all know our mission as a committee is to promote a passionate and committed organization that celebrates and embraces the uniqueness of each member within the Kentucky Realtors. And I would first like to thank Suzanne. She has helped us tremendously putting this together. We've been working months on this. So Suzanne, thank you. And Paul, thank you. They are our KYR staff, and we would not be able to do this without you all. So thank you, thank you. In addition to that, I would like to thank Lester Sanders, who is in charge of this subcommittee, and he has worked very diligently along with Raquel Carter, who has just been amazing getting all of this together. And I want to recognize our committee for this event. We've got also would like to thank Angela Clark, Tanya Friedman, Jennifer Swinneman, Brenda Gooslin, and Curtis Owens. Guys, it takes a village, and I just can't thank you all enough. And I know we're very excited. And at this time, I would like to hand it over to Raquel, and we'll go ahead and we'll get started.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's hard to match that energy right there. But I am excited to see so many of you guys here and see so many of us willing to have these conversations that we all agree are not always easy to have from any perspective. But what we do understand is us working collectively, having these discussions, us actually putting in the time and effort to learn some things we didn't know. We know by putting all these things in place that we actually have an opportunity to move the needle forward or continue to move the needle forward in the direction that we want to go. I'll also preface this. I have in every book club meeting or pre-meeting discussions we had about this book, The Color of Law. I mean, wow, guys, it was a pretty heavy read, wouldn't you think? I called it an academic, felt a little bit like school, but it had the real information in it. And often we are, and today, hopefully we're able to discuss our feelings. We're able to discuss our personal experiences and that type of thing, but to be able to put it in perspective with some dates and some historical activities that happened that actually informed our feelings and decision, I think it really helps to make a difference. So the only thing I ask of everyone is, one, that you please engage, feel comfortable in engaging. There's no judgment here. We want to be able to have these conversations. If we say the thing the wrong way, which we often do in everyday life, that may happen when we're having a conversation here too. Guys, you know, everyone give the other person grace and try to, you know, just understand that we're here. So if you're here, what we understand is that you already care and you're concerned and you want to move forward. Just to start the conversation off, when I read the preface of the book here, I mean, that in itself gave me enough information to say, wow, everything that I knew, everything that I learned or that I didn't learn growing up was wrong, you know, or just not even, you know, not even knowing those things. We had this, he begins, the author, Richard Robertson, begins with the definitions of de facto segregation and de jure segregation. And did I say it fancy enough? De jure segregation. So with the de facto segregation, really the definition of that was that segregation was a result of private practices and personal preferences. And to be honest with you guys, I really felt that for most of my life. You know, I knew about civil rights and I knew segregation was in place, but I did think continually we keep it in place because some of it is preference. Some of it is positive preference, some of it is negative preference. But then when we look at it from the perspective of de jure segregation, and what that means is that segregation actually happened and is rooted because of law and public policy that caused it, not because of racism, private practices, the way people feel, or because of personal preferences. That put it in a whole different perspective for me. And so I'd like to go ahead right now and open it up either to the board or to some of you guys to see if de facto or de jure segregation, or just the beginning of the book, how that spoke to you and how you felt about those definitions.
Well, Raquel, I'll start off if you can hear me.
I think mine is speaking. Should we do a raise?
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess I was surprised, having been in this industry for 35 years. Honestly, how complicit our own government was, and not just our government, but by extension, FHA. I mean, to me, that was, when I think of FHA, I mean, I think of them as a very open, welcoming, sort of liberal, trying to help those that are less fortunate. But to find out that they were, in fact, sort of the root of the evil in a way was just shocking to me.
Yeah, I agree. Any other thoughts?
Maybe somebody could help me with some clarity. And Lamont, I took that perspective too, is that I thought, I mean, the way I read it was that VA and FHA loans were not given to African Americans. Is that accurate, or was it that they just didn't apply because they knew they would be denied?
No, I mean, the way I read it is that it was in bold letters that I've got it here, that only those of the Caucasian race could qualify for loans.
That's the way I read it too.
Yeah, and in the beginning, it was more the builders or developers were trying to get these loans for their developments, and it basically excluded anyone but Caucasians from being able to get loans on those properties within the developments.
Segregated neighborhoods with their crime, violence, anger, and poverty.
Listen, we need everybody to kind of jump in here. We're all friends. There's no dumb questions. Only if you talk with your mic off. We'll laugh at that.
Yeah, but along the lines with what Elizabeth was saying, just for clarity, is that not only would they not lend to non-Caucasians, they would lend to a Caucasian that was purchasing in an area that may have had people that were non-Caucasian. I mean, if you had an African-American family that lived on that street, even a white person could not get a loan for a FHA loan for a house in that development. It branched out into appraisals quite a bit, right? Because they actually valued less, not only neighborhoods of color, but white neighborhoods that were near a neighborhood of color. So it wasn't even just, I mean, that you were there. I mean, proximity made a big difference as well. Did anybody else pick up on those details?
Yeah, the interesting thing about that was that by doing what they did, well, so many different things, but they in essence created a problem that wasn't there. There were actually mixed neighborhoods that wound up being forced to be segregated neighborhoods based on all of that. Yeah, it was really interesting to see how these things developed. Because in San Francisco, there was an issue. At Richmond, for instance, there were neighborhoods that were mixed. In Cleveland, there were neighborhoods that were mixed. I mean, these are areas now, even in Detroit, there were areas that were mixed. And these are all areas now that we see as segregated areas. So we see the beginnings of discrimination and segregation when there wasn't any. It was just crazy.
And the fact that they were helping the war effort so many places, everybody was doing that.
and they would build the new places, and they'd build a really nice one for one part and what do you call it, value efficient for the other. It was just crazy.
What was really interesting would have been the thought pattern of why these policies were put into place. Because as you read the book, they were talking about the gentleman, and I forget his name, Stevens, or I forget his name, but anyway, he was he worked for Ford.
Yeah.
Well, you had a plant that had 1,400 whites, 240 black individuals, and yet those 1,400 whites helped put together a contract that was going to protect the black employees. So it was like these individuals didn't seem to have a problem with black individuals. So why is the government having this problem by, it's like, who's thinking what here? It's crazy.
I think it was the leadership at the time, our government. You talk about government. It was the presidents that were in office, and the congressmen. A lot of them were just downright racist, and that promoted a lot of this until I think was it Herbert Hoover that was trying to be more liberal, and he got a lot of backlash from it, from what I understand. Now I did the audio book because it was easier for me than to have to sit and read it, but that was what I gathered from it.
Yeah. And I think that sums it up exactly, Kathy. It was de jure segregation. It was by design of the government. They specifically put these policies into place that, as Ron said, where there wasn't an issue, it then became one, right? And then where there is an issue, it solidified it, and that continued to perpetuate. Ron was mentioning the different communities that actually were affected by that. And I made a special note, because we are in Kentucky, about that 1917 case in Louisville that had that exact issue, where the policies were put in place to not allow someone to purchase in a residence that was already majority one color or the other. And that was their effort at fairness. It's like, oh, well, if we say it on the white side, it also meant someone white couldn't buy into a majority African-American neighborhood. So they packaged it up as a fairness issue, a harmonious. Did you guys remember them using that word several times? A harmonious neighbor issue, right? So they packaged it that way, but there were already neighborhoods that had, different races in it, and they were then about violations. So how did they actually, they weren't able to actually enforce that. It was in Louisville. Some of you guys are in Louisville, right?
Yes, absolutely. They mentioned Louisville a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of it is the fact that the homes were redlined and they did not appraise almost an identical home. If you were 4 streets away from a red line area, you may have the same exact home. And if you were Caucasian and wanted to buy in there, it would not appraise. And for many, many years, home ownership for minorities has always been very low. It still is very low. It still is.
Yeah, I agree. It is.
Kathy's correct. It was a lot your administration. I mean, you just look over the years how things change. And sometimes we go back to what we did 20 years ago, or sometimes we think we're bringing in a new strategy and new laws, and sometimes they're as bad as what we've had in the past, but I think that it was the times that we had not moved forward at all with integration, and a lot of people were not racist, but not next door to me, not next door.
I'm sorry, I mean to interrupt you. A lot of it carried over at the early turn of the 19th century from the Jim Crow era. And of course, we're still south of the Mason-Dixon here. So, I can see it here, but I'm from Northwestern Pennsylvania. And they talked about Philadelphia, of all places, where my mother was born and raised. And my parents, my dad didn't have a racist bone in his body. At least I don't remember him having one. And they talk about Philadelphia, where my mom grew up, and an area where a white professor and his wife bought land to develop a area of houses for African Americans, and they were blocked every step of the way, and they couldn't get builders. The builders, they made it so hard for them, whereas other developments, they just passed right on through. So it really blows my mind that Bucks County, Pennsylvania would have been that racist at that time in the turn of the century. But, it filtered up. I think it filtered up from the South and the era of, the Jim Crow era. So it's sad. I wish it wasn't. It was shocking for me. I didn't know that about, Pennsylvania. So.
Raquel, one of the comments that really stood out to me, I highlighted it. It's in the first chapter. As I was reading the book, I asked my staff, I said, what city do you think they featured in the first chapter of Color of Law, right? And so, things like, I don't know, like Atlanta or Birmingham, right? No, it's San Francisco, which I thought was such a brilliant move by Richard Rothstein, because it was sort of like, well, if it can happen there, it clearly was happening everywhere. But this comment, this statement that he made, the California Real Estate Commissioner refused to take any action, asserting that while regulations prohibited licensed agents from engaging in unethical practices, the exploitation of racial fear was not within the Real Estate Commission's jurisdiction. And this was written around the practice of blockbusting. And then it went on to say that ordinarily real estate boards found that they would blackball agents who sold to non-white buyers in white neighborhoods. And yet, as soon as blockbusting became a thing, they were suddenly okay with it, right? And it was essentially a financial exploitation of the Black community in San Francisco. And well, I think we've all known that our industry was complicit from the very early days. Like this felt so relevant to me still today, because this idea that the Real Estate Commission would say, not our jurisdiction, and then the association at the time would say, oh, not our jurisdiction, right? It's like we're all sitting around looking at each other, denying any culpability. And sometimes that still feels saddeningly relevant today, which is, I think as we look at what's happening at NAR, it's why I'm so proud that NAR is taking action on Article 10, because it very much seems like a moment where we're finally saying we're actually going to take responsibility for the actions of those who are misbehaving.
It was actually, Justin, I think what you were pointing, it was actually written into the Realtor Code of Ethics to not sell a property to someone of non-Caucasian. It's an ethics violation, right? And it didn't have anything to do with anything but race. It had nothing to do with the ability to purchase, credit worthiness, all these things that we like to talk about over time, longer term, having negative effects. When all things were equal, they still weren't allowed to purchase.
And Justin,
I'm feeling a little uneasy calling all these people racists. And you are correct. I have a copy of the Code of Ethics that from, I think it's 1929, I use it in my ethics class when I teach it. But to say it was for no other reason than racism, you're making that statement based upon today's values. And I really think that you need to go back to the time and see what was their motivation. And their motivation wasn't racism as much as it was trying to preserve value. And it's not that NAR, which it wasn't NAR at that time, but it wasn't that they were trying to promote racism. They were trying to fit the social values of the day. And those values were that introducing people of other races and colors did have an impact on the value. So it wasn't that it was being implemented by an entity or an organization or a government. This was something that was going on in the hearts of man at the time. Now, so we kind of need to identify why was it that some people, and certainly not everybody, but some people felt that way. But I'm kind of bristling at the idea that that we're saying that government caused it or government implemented it. We have to remember that government is the people. And so I think we're really dealing with a matter of heart more so than a matter of enforcement.
Well,
I think one of the
appreciate
things,
your comment and feel that way, but they were blatantly in the FHA, some of and that would not give home loans to anybody that was trying to any African Americans. They said I think they worded it as blacks or coloreds, and it was blatant. It was in their bylaws, and that's how they worded it. Whenever the what's it called, not redlining, but which we would get into. Well, anyway, I just want to say in the book, it just talks about how blatant it was. And whenever we had communities that were already kind of mixed, living together, the government actually went in and made that not happen anymore. They would incorporate places and make one place all white, and they wouldn't, and they would word it that way. It wasn't by accident. They would say it was just for white people, and if a black person were to move in, then we had our realtors come in and get newspaper articles, bold print, and say on there that you need to sell your house because color people, and they'd say color people, and to be in the newspaper. They're moving in, it's going to devalue your home. Where before, if you try to sell to an African American, they wouldn't allow you to be a part of their MLS. But whenever they realize they're going to make money, they would sell. They would go in and kind of scare people to sell their homes, and then they would sell it to African Americans at enormous prices. But I get it, that's the heart of the people, and we are the heart of the people. But it was the heart of the people was a little racist.
one of the things going along with what, following up on what Doug was saying, but also going along with what Tanya said, we all know right from wrong. What's right today, why wouldn't it have been right then? Fair is fair no matter what time period we're in. You've got to remember, here in Louisville, the first African-American realtor, 1972, you could not be a realtor in Louisville until 1972. If we all agree that wealth comes to a lot of people through home ownership, and that was being greatly denied, then you have to say it wasn't right then. It's still not right now. Yeah, and it's people that put policies in place. Policies just don't happen by themselves. And so there were people that were actually putting these policies in place. And what he does, he lays out for us so that we can see how it was done systematically. Sometimes we don't like to accept that things were done systematically, but it shows us that things were done, have been done, and are still being done systematically, even from a racist standpoint.
Yes, I'm gonna say that racism is an ugly word, but at the same time, you can't attribute the fact that they used value. Using value was a racist way to segregate, which was a horrible thing to do. And any way you want to look at it, I was always of the impression, until my eyes have been open recently, that racism was something that you were educated with, which in my opinion was not being educated well at all. But then to know the complexity of the government in this and the way that they set down hard and fast rules, I find that very disconcerting, and I can't get over the fact of how implicit we were in our government, in all branches of government, that brought this about and separated the people the way that it did. As you all said, even in areas where everyone was fine and getting along, the government came in and made sure that that did not continue.
Good point, Pam. And along the lines with what Douglas was saying and Tanya, where we're talking about this concept of value, there were several points that the author made regarding how value was reflected and affected by these policies. When you get to the end of it, I even believe that there's been research that was done that showed that there was no decline in value because neighborhoods became mixed initially. However, there were several steps that the government had put in place that would decrease the value. And in my notes, some of those things I had written were the quality of housing in the beginning. You know, they purposely, when they built 2 settlements for those veterans, you guys, people, blacks and whites, both equally fought for our country. They came back and they built 2 separate sets of houses for them under 2 separate standards, right? So with the African Americans were allowed only to purchase the substandard housing, then in turn, they always had less value in that African American neighborhood. They also talked about when African Americans were able to purchase, they were only allowed higher rate mortgages, or not mortgages at the time, right? They couldn't amortize, they couldn't actually build equity in their houses. So they had to pay more. They had, higher payments. They had to pay more than value, and they weren't able to then keep up with the property because they're, running behind all the time, just trying to keep up.
There was no grace period. If they were late on a payment, they lost their everything. They lost what they.
That was it. Yeah, that was it. So the value argument is flawed in itself, because the only time that the value was negatively impacted was because it was forced as well by policy, according to the author. Another thing that affected value was the location of the industrial and chemical plants. They were typically placed, in areas where minorities live. So that's automatically going to affect the quality of life and the ability to have the homes appreciate. Yeah. And that's still,
I think along those lines.
We're talking about our FHA. Our FHA at that time, they would approve where they're trying to create low cost subdivisions. So they would approve these low financing fees, but it was explicit in their documents, in the forms, only if there were no blacks. And it said no. I mean, it was in black and white. So, and I don't know why this is not taught in school. I didn't know this. I learned this in this book. It's ridiculous. Sorry, Lil.
That's okay. I did too. Jen, were you going to say something? Okay.
I was just along those lines of the neighborhoods were traditionally adjacent to chemical plants or factories and such. As cities grew, as we grew suburbs, and we were building interstates and we were building infrastructure to support new growth, it was often at the expense of either a mixed neighborhood or an African American neighborhood. So there's just so many ways that it just by design we've put an entire population behind the 8 balls that relates to being able to create wealth, generate wealth, and change their trajectory for their families. And we've done it for generations, and it's horrifying.
This is when it comes in handy being an older person. I don't think I'm the oldest one on the screen, but I'm close, because I remember as a small child seeing a sign over a water fountain in Louisville, downtown. And I asked my mother what it said, and she said, "It's not a nice sign." And if that was not enough, I said, "What does it say?" And she said, it says no, it says whites only over the sign. And so, you know, it has been around for a long time. And when I hear it wasn't taught, and I sometimes forget that we have folks who've never seen stuff like that. But even in my lifetime, those kinds of things have been prevalent and visible right here in my own, you know, not on TV, right here in my own town with my own eyes. I've witnessed that sort of thing in the past, in the very recent past. I'm not that old.
Raquel, you made a good comment before the call began, talking about history, but this is history that's like within our lifetime. It's not like the Civil War. I mean, all these things, like with Doug, I mean, these happened within our lifetime. So my question is, I guess, we talked about why is it not taught? Why do we not, you know, knowledge is power. What are the reasons we don't teach this? Why is it taking so long for us to have the conversation? I'm just opening it up for conversation.
Doug, I think I've got you on age, young man.
And I'm glad that you're still with us, given your recent history.
I don't know if you covered this or not, but, and you probably did because I was late to get on. We had all the fair housing laws that told us what we were not to do, and so forth. But it wasn't until, and you may have covered this, 1988, where there was a way to prosecute people. And in 1988, the first prosecution was a broker in Stone Mountain, Georgia, who was selling his own rental house. And it really got messed up because another realtor sold it. He found out later on that the people buying it were African American. Without telling anybody, he put the house back up for rent, even though the process was for sale. It was in process to sell. And he ended up being fined $80-some thousand and a bunch of other things. I think he lost the house and so forth. But we had all these nice things to say that we were supposed to do. And that's what the government told us, but there was no way to back it up. And by the way, Doug, I was amazed. In 1957, we took a trip down to Florida and went through Georgia, Alabama, and so forth like that. And I saw the stuff that you saw. And
as a child, well, in 1972, 1971, I guess somewhere in there, I was singing in my church's youth choir. Now, it was a Baptist church. That was before I married and became Methodist. And but our youth choir went to Georgia, and we had Blacks in our youth choir. And we were scheduled to sing in a service there in Georgia, and we were told that that the Blacks could not come in and sing. That, you know, we were welcome, but the Blacks could not come in. And our youth choir said, "Well, you either get all of us or none of us." And they let us in. I don't know if the attendance dropped or not, but that's what we were told. That was in the 70s. And so once again, you know, it was right there. But these were people. There was not bylaws or anything like that in the church's doctrines that said Blacks couldn't come in the door. It was people that were in charge. And so, you know, we were all amazed in our group.
Raquel,
great discussion.
You know, it's up to you. I mean, I know we had talked about doing some breakout rooms where we could get smaller groups to discuss that first part, but it's your call. So you just let us know.
Yeah, well, and that's actually what I was going to bring up. These are great discussions. We actually have the opportunity now if you guys want to continue to discuss as a whole, it's great, but I'd love for more people to have an opportunity to kind of chime in. So if it's okay, what we'd like to do is break you guys into, Paul's got some magic that like he does all like this and everybody goes, and everybody ends up in a little discussion group, and then you sit real tight and you hold on to your chair and then he'll zoom us back in. So we could go ahead and do that to give the opportunity to talk in smaller groups if everybody's okay with that. Does that sound good?
I think that's
All
great.
right, Magic Man, let's get us in the group. And each group actually will have, I should have said this, each group will have a moderator, someone from the committee that will be there to help us, you know, just guide the conversation a little bit. We talk quite a bit as a group. That's wonderful. This is great conversation. So but we do want to finish up at 1. So we'll give us probably maybe 15 minutes or so just to get to know each other and talk. And then Paul will zoom us back in. And then we'll plan to continue this conversation at our next session. So we'll, whatever you don't get to say now, write it down so you won't forget it. And then we'll continue. But Paul, go ahead and do your magic.
And you should receive an invitation to join a room. Go ahead and accept that.
Paul, are we all supposed to join the same room and then break out from there?
No, everyone should receive an invitation to join a breakout room, and then you accept that invitation.
Oh, they're moving me.
Okay, Susan, now I got that breakout room thing where I can join.
Hey, Suzanne, you there?
Brenda, are you there? Hey, Brenda. I can't. Hold on, turn yourself off mute.
I realized after I said that.
No, I'm trying to get Paul back in here to see if we can get you in on one of those break rooms.
Okay, hit saying the host is inviting you to join break room 3.
So click that.
Okay.
Click that and you'll instantly be pulled there. And then he should come back. Yep.
Hello.
Hi. I think Brenda got to her room finally, so she's good. I really don't want to go to that room.
Which room?
My room. Can I just stay in here?
Yeah, sure. Which room? Because she was supposed to be originally room 6, but she
said she went to, you had invited her to room 3, so she went in there.
Okay. Yeah, there she is. Okay.
She couldn't find the link, I guess, which I had sent to her multiple times, so I don't know what happened there. But she should be good now.
Trying to find if there is a setting for the breakout room closing down. I think it defaults to 30 seconds for when I close that, or 60, maybe it's 60 seconds. But I'm trying to find it because I don't want to look silly.
When did you all decide to come back?
She said 15 minutes and I set a timer and it's going to be darn close to 12:55. So I figured I'd just do it to 12:55. I'd bring everybody back.
Yeah.
Whoops. That's not what I wanted to do. Oh, well. That's actually on the timer. It'll end in 60 seconds on the timer, so.
Okay. Hey.
I think it's going great.
Good.
It's going awesome.
Just not enough time. You know, it's like always you fight for time and then we're all like, oh, I got to be somewhere at 1:15.
I know.
Yeah.
And we're back.
And we're back.
Seamless, Paul Del Rio.
Hey, that's what I'm all about. If you notice me, there's usually something wrong. If you don't notice me, everything's working smoothly, right?
You did pull me out of room 5 pretty abruptly, and it messed up my hair.
I knew as soon as I started doing that, people were probably just, hey, how's it going?
Like a big cane, a big hook pulling me out.
Hey, Paul, that's one way to get me to stop talking.
Oh no.
You got it.
Thank you for putting me in my place. I was in the wrong room and I couldn't figure out how to get where I was supposed to be. So thank you for your help.
Well, I'm gonna finish saying what I was saying when y'all cut me off.
Look, we cut off. Where'd you go? Out left.
Well, okay. I was explaining in 1968, homeownership for Black people was 42% when the Fair Housing Act was passed, and it increased in 2006 to 48%, which is still not an acceptable level. Consider the aggregate is about 78%. And so then after the mortgage crisis, which affected African Americans more than anybody during the mortgage crisis, it went back down to 42%. And it went up a little bit now, it's currently at 44%. However, in Louisville, we have a homeownership African American rate of 38%, which is totally unacceptable. And that's what the National Association of Real Estate Brokers is grappling with, trying to increase homeownership for African Americans, for Black people currently.
Curtis, do you know who the lowest states are?
No, I don't. I don't know all the states individually. No, I sure don't. I know we're at 38%. That's got to bring down the average of 44 rather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you guys, the breakout room seems so small, so short. The breakout room was real short. So, but you guys don't worry. What we want to do is continue this conversation. So we do have a second session for this book already scheduled on March the 25th, the same Thursday. I think it's the fourth Thursday of March as well, but it's March 25th, and we'll be able to continue these conversations. I just want us to leave with a couple of points that we would like to focus on or discuss a little more thoroughly going forward. We started with great conversations about our personal feelings and the things that we thought or the things that surprised us and some of those things in history. What we would like to do in our next conversation is to bring it local, just like Curtis said. You know, we still have an issue here today, right now. So we want to talk about where that is and what type of things that we can do or what type of ideas we can come up with that can help us move forward. In acknowledging our feelings or what we thought about these things, we have to also say we just had the conversation in our small breakout group about not seeing currently, or it might not be visible, the explicit racism. But what we understand is that the system had already been put in place. Like Curtis said, if African Americans are still at 42% home ownership, that's not just because of income. That's not just because of credit. That's because I think Art shared with us, it was 1988, you know, when it was even possible to be enforced if people were discriminating against someone for a mortgage or those types of things. So we're talking about how many decades that they have to overcome, where white families had those same decades of home ownership and to build equity and to have money to pass down to their children and to go to college. So then we see how that affects education and those types of things. So we want to move our conversation in our next group to exactly that, like, where are we today? Where are we in our local community? And what can we do to move that conversation and hopefully develop some actions to move forward? Does that sound good? Elizabeth, do you have anything that you want to add? Lester?
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Raquel, for leading this discussion, and thanks everyone for being here. They're extremely valuable. They're not always easy, but they're the type of things that we have to talk about if we really want to make a difference. And I'll leave it there and hand it over to Elizabeth.
Again, thank you all on behalf of KYR Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. We appreciate your all's participation. Looking forward to March 25th. If there's anything we can do, please let us know. And Raquel, great job.
Okay, thank you guys. You guys have a great day.